11 minutes. That is all the time it took for the President of the United States to make what Warren Buffett would later call the single most expensive impulse decision in modern diplomatic history. And the most stunning part? Washington thought it was a victory. If you follow this story closely, drop a comment right now. What do you think Canada should have done next? And stick with us, because what happens in the next 6 hours will completely change how you see this. The call between Donald Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney had been arranged through 2 weeks of private back-channel talks. Both governments had designated it as the final leader-to-leader opportunity to resolve a trade conflict that economic advisors on both sides had warned was heading toward permanent structural damage to one of the world's most intertwined bilateral relationships. Canada had prepared for this moment with serious intent. Carney's trade team, national security advisors, and economic analysts had spent 3 weeks building a comprehensive compromise framework from the ground up. Not a rough outline, a full, layered proposal designed with detailed knowledge of American political needs. One specifically engineered so that Trump could present its terms as a win to his own base. The proposal was built around 5 mutually beneficial pillars. A 15-year energy partnership locking in Canadian natural gas and electricity to the United States at stable, favorable prices, projected to cut household heating costs by 11% across the Northeast and Midwest. Accelerated critical mineral agreements giving U.S. defense contractors first access to Canadian nickel, cobalt, and lithium, resources the Pentagon had been urgently flagging as strategically endangered. Reopened Canadian market access for American agricultural and manufacturing exports, valued at roughly $12 billion annually. A joint infrastructure investment structure channeling billions into projects in states that matter most to Trump's political coalition. And phased mutual tariff reductions tied to a binding dispute resolution calendar, so that no future disagreement would ever reach this level of escalation again. Independent economic reviews conducted in the week after the call placed the total value of this proposal to the United States between $89 and $114 billion over 10 years. This was not a weak offer dressed up in diplomatic language. It was a serious, generous exit ramp designed by the other side to let the United States walk away from the conflict intact and ahead. If you want to understand exactly how a 24-hour window shattered all of that, stay with us, because the sequence of events matters deeply. And if you are watching this for the first time, make sure you are subscribed. We track these developments daily, and the next update changes everything. The call began at 2:15 in the afternoon Eastern Time. On the Canadian side sat Carney, the finance minister, the foreign affairs minister, the lead trade negotiator, and 4 senior policy advisors. On the American side were the president, the U.S. trade representative, the national security advisor, and 2 senior aides. According to accounts that align across 5 independent sources from officials present on both ends of the line, the tone was tense from the opening seconds. Trump bypassed diplomatic pleasantries entirely and opened with a demand that Canada unilaterally withdraw all of its countermeasures before any American concessions would be considered. Carney replied that the framework he was prepared to share addressed the concerns of both governments simultaneously and proposed walking through it in full before isolating any individual element. Trump interrupted. Carney continued. Trump interrupted a second time. Carney, drawing on the measured discipline of a former central banker who had steered economies through genuine crisis, remained composed and proceeded through the proposal point by point. At the 11-minute mark, Carney was mid-sentence on the energy partnership element. He was walking through the pricing structure, the volume guarantees, and the 15-year consumer savings projection for American households. That is the moment the line went dead. Not from a technical failure, not from a dropped signal. According to sources confirmed across both governments, Trump spoke 4 sentences and ended the call himself. The words, as confirmed by participants on both sides, "Mark, this isn't working. You people don't get it. Call me when you're ready to be serious." Then silence. Permanent silence. The planned 45-minute session had run 11 minutes. The 3-week proposal had been heard for roughly 7 of those minutes. The energy element that would have saved American households $47 billion across 15 years was cut off in the middle of its own description. Here is what Washington did not see coming, and this is the part that rewrites the entire story. For 6 hours and 14 minutes after the line went dead, Ottawa issued no public statement, no press briefing, no leaked frustration, no emergency media appearance. Washington read the silence as paralysis. White House leaks began circulating within the hour, describing the cutoff as a deliberate power display. Senior figures told journalists that the president had made clear Canada's terms were unacceptable. Cable news filled the afternoon with debate over whether it was a strategic masterstroke or a breach of protocol. By evening, the White House communications operation had locked in its narrative. Canada had been put on notice, and the next move was theirs. The narrative was wrong, and because the White House had already put that framing on the record publicly, they had no way to walk it back when what came next arrived. Inside Ottawa, those 6 hours were the opposite of quiet. Within 20 minutes of the call ending, Carney convened an emergency cabinet session in the Privy Council chamber. It ran for 4 hours and 40 minutes. The discussion, according to those present, was not about whether to respond. That question had already been answered before Carney sat down. The conversation was about calibration. Every measure under consideration was weighed against 3 standards. Was it proportionate to what had occurred? Was it forceful enough to be unambiguous? And was it structured to preserve the moral standing Canada would need to hold as it sought international support in the days ahead? Legal teams finalized countermeasure directives that had been drafted weeks earlier as contingency documents. Because Carney's government, having tracked the pattern of American diplomatic conduct over 2 years, had quietly prepared response packages for a range of scenarios, including this one precisely. At 8:29 that evening, 6 hours and 14 minutes after the line went silent, the Canadian government released a joint statement across every available platform. It was delivered not by Carney alone, but standing together with the finance minister, the foreign affairs minister, and the defense minister. The staging was deliberate. You cut off one person, you received an answer from an entire country. The package contained 5 measures, each targeting a distinct layer of the bilateral relationship, each calibrated for maximum effect with minimum overreach. Immediate emergency tariffs on American goods across 7 sectors: farm products, manufactured goods, technology equipment, pharmaceutical components, financial services, entertainment and media, and construction materials. Hitting the political geography more precisely than any pure economic logic, targeting industries concentrated in battleground states the administration could not afford to lose. The projected annual cost to American exporters, $4.7 billion, effective at midnight. A strategic reduction, not a full halt, in natural gas and electricity shipments to 12 American states, trimming supply by 18%, enough to move heating prices, enough to generate news in every affected state, enough to make visible what full escalation would look like without triggering it. The 18% was a signal. Canada had chosen restraint, and restraint has a ceiling. Formal recall of the Canadian ambassador from Washington, the first such action in the 158-year history of the relationship, with all joint working groups, task forces, and partnership committees paused indefinitely, pending a restoration of, as Ottawa's official language stated, diplomatic conduct consistent with the norms governing relations between sovereign democratic states. A suspension of specific defense cooperation activities, including joint training operations, certain intelligence sharing protocols under the Five Eyes arrangement, and NORAD coordination on designated continental defense functions, calculated not to jeopardize overall continental security, but to deliver a message directly to the one corner of Washington that carried the most institutional weight, the Pentagon. Military commanders began pressing internally for resolution at a speed that economic pressure alone had never produced. And the 5th measure, the one no one in Washington had modeled, a complete freeze on new regulatory approvals for American banks, investment firms, insurance companies, and financial technology groups operating in Canadian markets. The freeze did not expel them. It froze their ability to open new client relationships, launch new products, complete new transactions, or expand current operations. For the 5 largest U.S. banks, all of which run significant Canadian businesses, the immediate income impact was real, and the long-term strategic exposure was worse. A Wall Street analyst on a morning call that circulated widely put it plainly: Market position lost during a regulatory freeze does not automatically return when the freeze ends. This was permanent damage framed as temporary measure. And then Carney spoke to his country and to the world. He stood in the House of Commons, every seat filled, the diplomatic gallery packed with envoys from 30 nations who had requested places in advance. He stood at the lectern without notes. The chamber was already silent before he opened his mouth. He recounted the call without embellishment. He described the proposal his government had spent 3 weeks building. He said aloud that the line had run 11 minutes. He said that the last thing he heard from the leader of Canada's closest partner was silence. And then, in a tone that was not angry, because anger would have given the White House something to dismiss, but cold and conclusive, like a person stating a fact they have finished grieving, he said this: "There are many pressures a sovereign country can absorb in hard negotiations. Financial strain, sharp language, excessive demands. Those are the tools of difficult bargaining. And Canada has demonstrated over 2 years that it can bear each one without surrendering its independence or its composure. But there is one thing no country can accept and remain whole: disrespect." The president did not reject our proposal. He did not counter it. He did not engage it. He ended the call. And ending a call is not a negotiating position. It is a declaration that the person on the other end does not deserve to be heard. Then he looked directly at the camera. "I have a short message for the president, in keeping with the brevity you extended to our discussion. 9 words. You ended the call. We stayed present. See the contrast?" The chamber rose, every party, every member, the diplomatic gallery standing. The applause ran longer than a minute. The 9 words were trending in 14 countries within the hour. Within 24 hours, "see the contrast" had become the phrase that defined not just this episode, but the entire 2-year arc of the conflict. The difference between a leader who cannot finish a conversation and a country that refused to be dismissed. Warren Buffett addressed what he had witnessed in his own terms, and what he said carries far beyond this dispute. He had watched more deals collapse from disrespect than from disagreement in 70 years in business. His distinction was precise. Disagreement is when you believe the other side's price is too high. Disrespect is when you signal that the other side's time has no value to you. Disagreement can be revisited in the next meeting. Disrespect travels into every meeting that follows for the life of the relationship. Trump had not rejected a proposal. He had signaled that the person presenting it was not worth 45 minutes. And when you do that to the leader of a sovereign nation that holds energy leverage, mineral leverage, defense integration, and financial market access over your own economy, the cost of those 5 seconds of dismissal is not abstract. It is measured in billions, in broken frameworks, in a $47 billion energy deal that died mid-sentence, in 89 to 114 billion in total economic value that independent analysts confirmed was on the table and is now permanently off it. Carney stated it plainly in his parliamentary address. The proposal available yesterday is no longer available. It will not be offered again. It will not be reworked. A country does not invest 3 weeks building a balanced framework for a partner unwilling to invest 45 minutes to hear it. The line between disagreement and disrespect is the line between a conflict that can still be resolved and one that cannot. Cross it, and no policy adjustment brings you back. No tariff revision, no revised trade framework, no new call request reaches across it. Because the issue is no longer the terms. The issue is whether the other side believes you are worth listening to at all. Now, here is what you need to think about before you scroll past this. This was not a trade dispute that collapsed. This was an exit ramp that cost nothing to take, worth over $100 billion in real economic value, built by the other side to save face for both. And it was ended mid-sentence before the most important part was even finished. What does that tell you about the cost of 5 seconds of impulse when the other person across the table actually has leverage? Drop your answer in the comments. We read every single one, and we are covering the next development in this story daily as it moves.